Welcome to this conversation with journalist, author, and film critic Elizabeth Weitzman, which is the final event of Ivy Film Festival's weekend of career chats with leaders in the film industry. I'm Sasha Pinto, a senior here at Brown and one of the directors of the Ivy Film Festival. And before we welcome Elizabeth to the Zoom stage, I am delighted to tell you a little bit about her. So for 15 years, Elizabeth was a film critic for the New York Daily News, which has one of the largest circulations of any paper in the country. And if you're a New Yorker like me, you know that virtually everybody walks around the city with a copy of the paper tucked under their arm. And moreover, a few years ago, Elizabeth was named one of the top film critics in New York by The Hollywood Reporter, and one of only 3 women to make the list that year. Most recently, she has covered film for the Rap News, which is an amazing digital news site that has won ample awards and was named the best entertainment website by the National Arts and Entertainment Journalism Awards of the LA Press Club. Additionally, Elizabeth has interviewed hundreds of celebrities and has written about entertainment for such prestigious publications as the New York Times, The Village Voice, Marie Claire, Harper's Bazaar, Interview Magazine, and many more. And if all that isn't enough, Elizabeth is also the author of over 24 books for young people, in addition to this stunning book, Renegade Women in Film and TV, about 50 pioneering women who, against all odds, triumphed in the entertainment industry and changed the face of it, both in front of the cameras and behind the scenes. It's a truly glorious book that should be required reading for anyone interested in entering this industry. And on that note, it is my great honor to welcome Elizabeth Weitzman. Hello, Elizabeth. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for having me and for that lovely introduction, too.
Well, thank you for being here. And let me just start by saying how incredibly generous it is of you to join us at IFF and share your expertise with students. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we couldn't be more thrilled. So tell us, what have you been up to during these months of quarantine? I imagine it's been quite a while since you've been inside a theater, but have you been able to review films that were released via streaming platforms or that premiered in drive-ins even?
Yes, so it is true that there aren't many films, unfortunately, being released in theaters now. Hardly any at all, but they are going to streaming, which is great because it means we can all see them. I have mostly been teaching for the last 9 months. Actually, it's become so easy to do that from anywhere. I taught a high school class this week in New York at Riverdale, and I taught some law students a couple weeks ago, and I love that. I love talking to students, so that has been great.
That's so lovely. And getting down to business, we're all so excited to hear about your career as a film writer and how you got started, because I suspect everyone listening here today is doing so with an ear to determine how they can apply your experiences to their lives and job search. So starting with college, what was your major and where were you headed with your degree after graduation?
Okay, so I hope this can be inspirational for some students watching today, because I was an English and French major and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with it at all. So I graduated. I really didn't have a great plan. I thought I was going to go into politics because I had done some political interning in college. I went to Emory and I moved to DC. And I worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative aide for a congressman. And it was really cool. It was a great experience. But I realized after a few years in this very competitive field that I did not have this sort of driving passion that everyone around me did, to just sort of eat, breathe, think politics 24/7. And it's like that, I think, in any competitive field. So I knew that that was not the field for me. And then after a couple of years in it, I started taking some classes in writing and editing on the weekends and at night. And I did like that a lot. And so I kind of moved on from there.
Wow. And so what compelled you to redirect your career into film and get a master's degree in cinema studies?
Okay, so I actually thought that I was going to be a music critic. I started as a music critic for an offshoot of The Village Voice. But once again, I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't the right fit. My editor assigned me country music as my regular beat, and I had to do a lot of catch up just to be able to write knowledgeably on this subject that I had never even intended to cover. But while I was there, they needed a movie critic at one point, and I volunteered and I loved it immediately. And so that was when I knew that I had found the area that I really wanted to dedicate my time and focus to. But if this is inspirational for anyone as well, I will tell you that I was 27 when I had that realization. So it took quite some time before I got there.
Wow. Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about your career path within the film industry? For example, what were your first jobs and how did you get them?
Sure. So I started out, I was a full-time editor. Once I knew that I wanted to do this, I became a full-time editor just because that was a much easier way to earn a living right away. And then on the side, again, like on weekends and at night, I started reaching out to, I started on sort of the first tier, which I do recommend. And so I started offering to write for free. This was the late 90s. So it was zines and it was, blogs and websites. And not many people are going to turn down free writing, honestly. So I got lots of writing samples very quickly. And once I had those, I then tried to craft really great pitches. And then I aimed high. Then I went to the places that I love, the film writing that I loved, which were Interview and The Village Voice. And they both gave me a shot. And I kept sort of working at both of those places as a contributing writer full time. And at the same time, I did something else that was super helpful. I took a class in journalism at the New School with a professor named Sue Shapiro. Her class is online now, so anyone can take it, which is great. And what she does is bring top editors in to each class. And so then you have this automatic connection that you would just never get otherwise. And so I started sending pitches to all the editors that came to her class. Wow. And that's how I wound up. Yeah, it was great. And then from there, I went to Marie Claire because one of the editors there I pitched to. And one of my editors at Marie Claire went to Harper's Bazaar and she took me with her. And another one went to the Daily News. And then she called me and she said, we're looking for a film critic full time. Does that interest you? And I said, absolutely. So that's how it went.
That's such a great tip, taking that class. That's really amazing. And I think we all realize that being a good film critic involves much more than just being able to turn a fancy phrase. So can you bring it down to the basics and explain the nuts and bolts of a film critic's job?
Yes. Well, okay. So traditionally speaking, there are usually two elements to a film critic's job. One obviously is watching movies and writing reviews, which everyone knows about. But the other, which people often don't hear about, is reporting on the movies. So often that means that you will interview an actor or a director who has a new movie out, or you will cover film festivals. You might write an overview of movies with the best Oscar chances, or do a deep dive into, a forgotten auteur, or really anything that kind of strikes your interest and your editor thinks would also be of interest to readers.
Right. Interesting. And can you explain the distinction between a film review and film criticism, which I understand to be more an academic analysis?
Sure. So there are certainly different kinds of criticism, and an academic review will look different from a newspaper review, which will look different from a blog review. You always use your own style and your own voice, but you do write for your audience as well. But I do think that we use the terms pretty interchangeably. I think academics are more likely to make that distinction. I don't usually hear film critics make it. It's really just who you're writing for.
Right, that makes sense. And staying with the nuts and bolts, can you tell us, for example, are film critics' jobs usually freelance, or are they staff positions, or does that just depend on whether it's television, print, cable, digital, etc.?
I think there has been a big shift, and I think that journalism has changed a lot since I started, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. But also there are good sides to it as well. I think it was more likely to get a staff writer job when I started. But you could still get a contributing writer job, which means that you are what I would call permalance. And now I think that most writers are permalance if they want something that's very steady, which is to say you're sort of permanently freelancing for a particular place or for several particular places. To get a full-time job, you'd be much more likely to be, I think, an editor today than you would to be a writer. But they are out there. They're few and far between, but there's lots of other options. So.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I'm also curious how many films you would normally review in a typical pre-pandemic week. And were you seeing all early screenings? How did that work?
Yes, so that is definitely a fun part of the job. You do go to screenings before the movie comes out, and it depends if you're writing for a magazine, for example, which has a long lead time. You might see it 4 months in advance. Or if you're writing for example, a daily newspaper, you'll probably see it a week in advance. Or if it's not a great movie, you'll see it a couple days in advance, or they won't even have a critic screening. There have been lots of those. But mostly you go in advance to a screening room, which is a very nice way to see a movie. It's usually a small room that's very comfortable, and then you'll see it far enough advance that you can think about it. You may want to see it again if it's a very important movie, and then you can write about it and have time before it comes out.
Wow.
And so how many do we see? So normally, if you're a full-time critic, you'll probably see about 5 movies a week, I would say. But, it depends because, for example, if you're covering a film festival, you might see 20 movies in a week. You're going to see several every day. So.
Wow. Well, that sounds like fun. That's for sure.
It is fun.
And I'm interested if you have a particular method or process you use when watching and analyzing a film.
Yeah, I definitely look at every element. And even when I'm watching for fun now, I still do this. I can't really sort of turn my brain off anymore, but I actually find that enhances the experience, so that's okay with me. But I do look at every element. Most people, when they watch a movie, I think that they do pay attention to the script and to the performances, but I'm always looking at the editing and the score and the set design and just sort of every single element, not as distractions in any way, but just as building blocks of the bigger picture.
Right, that makes sense. And you've written for so many prestigious publications like the New York Times, The Village Voice, and Harper's Bazaar, and interviewed so many actors. Can you tell us how those opportunities came about?
Yeah, sure. So again, a lot of it started with Sue Shapiro's class, where she brought in those editors. Yeah. And like I said, editors are always looking not just for great writers, but for consistent and responsible writers, which is, I think, it's hard to find all of those things in one. So when they find them, they will always want to stick with those writers. And that's great. Like if you know that, then be that person. And they're always looking for that person. So again, when one editor went to another place, he or she would almost always call me up from there and say, hey, you want to work for me too? Yeah. And so it just it all builds on itself once you have like a really solid base. And in interview in particular, as the title suggests, most of what they do is Q&As, right, with filmmakers or artists. And so I got a really strong base right at the start. I mean, they threw me in right away with interviewing celebrities, and I was very, very intimidated when I started. But like anything else, you get used to it and you learn how to do it. And then it goes really well. My very first interview was with Willie Nelson, which was great. Wow. He couldn't have been easier and more chill and more fun. And so I thought, oh, wow, this is easy. This is, how can you make a living at this? But then my second one, that was at The Voice. My second one was for interview. And it was with the filmmaker Wong Kar-wai, who makes very kind of enigmatic movies. And I love his movies. I love his work. I'm sure there's fans watching who do as well. But as a filmmaker, he is just as enigmatic. Okay, like when you talk to him. And so everything I asked him, I got either a yes or a no, or, well, what do you think? Or, well, I don't like to talk about that. Or, well, I prefer the audience figure it out. And I wound up with this interview. I was near tears. I mean, I was brand new at this. I wanted to impress my editor. It was my first interview and I was so upset. And my editor taught me a great lesson, which was that what people don't say is just as valuable as what they do. And so we wound up with this actually very interesting interview that really reflected, who Wong Kar-wai is as an artist. So I don't know, I guess that's just sort of how I kind of learned to do this.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great story. And I'm also wondering if you had to adopt a different stylistic voice for different publications, because it would seem that the Village Voice, with its historically urban, cool sensibility, would be looking for a different type of article than, say, Harper's Bazaar.
Yes, that's a great question. And that was another hard lesson that I had to learn early on. So I started at The Voice and then I went to interview. And so I had this style, as you described, that was kind of very specific style. And then when I got hired at the Daily News, I wrote my first review. It was in 2000, it was for Hamlet. It was Ethan Hawke and Hamlet. And I wrote this review and it was very academic, I guess I would say. And my editor called me up and he said, okay, you're going to have to rewrite this from scratch. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? I thought, well, did I fail at this? I was young. I didn't know. And he said, no, he said, you're not writing for the Daily News reader. You're writing for the Village Voice reader.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so I had to, he said, and he actually sent me like a whole bunch of old papers and there wasn't that much online still at the time from the earlier years. He wanted me to go way back and really read like, the last decade or two. And I did. And then, I guess I hadn't really done enough research as to who my audience was. So I still had the same opinion when I rewrote that review, but I had to rewrite it from scratch, focusing on different things, using different language, writing for a different person altogether.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's so interesting. And can you tell us how digital media has changed the landscape of film criticism? Because I'm reading that there may never again be megastar critics like Pauline Kael or Siskel and Ebert.
Yeah, definitely things have changed, but I would like to think that it is almost entirely for the better, because I think that it has democratized the system so much more. Anybody who's watching today, if they want to put in the work, if they have the interest, if they have the background, if they do the research, can be a film critic. There once was a time where there were only a few critics in each city. And if you didn't live in or near a city, then, you're out of luck completely. Yeah. Whereas now anybody can do it. There's so many different ways and so many different places. And also, which I love, there are so many different sites focusing on different things. So if you have a particular knowledge or interest in a certain genre, that can be your niche. You don't have to sort of fit one specific thing anymore. And you don't have so many people trying for one job anymore either, which is great.
Yeah, and that's great news for all of us hoping to break into the industry as well. And if you were going to pick a few terrific film critics as paragons of great film journalism that students could study, and of course we're putting you on that list too, who would they be?
So, well, Kael and Ebert would definitely be among them. And I would also add Molly Haskell, who really was a big influence on me, especially when I was in grad school. And in fact, I saw her when I just sold my book proposal. I saw Molly Haskell at the New York Film Critics Circle dinner, the awards we do every year. I'd never met her ever, and she really was kind of an icon for me, having been a grad student. But I saw her across the room, and and I don't normally do this kind of thing. I went straight over to her and I told her about the book, and I told her I would love to interview her. So she was maybe the first interview that I actually got for the book because I was so excited to talk to her. So she's on the list. But you know what? I actually don't think it only needs to be sort of classic critics, because again, as we were just saying, you can go to Rotten Tomatoes now, especially the top critic section, or you can go to Metacritic and see so many different voices, which again, we didn't used to have. Sure. So I would recommend doing that too. Go to Rotten Tomatoes, see who really speaks to you, who's maybe covering the movies that you like most or covering them in a way that speaks to you, and really kind of just start following them, learning from them.
Yeah, that's great advice. And kind of putting it all together, can you walk us through some tangible steps that students can take right now to learn the art of writing intelligent film criticism and break into the industry?
Yes. Okay. So the first thing is to know your subject. That's really important. So study the classics, but also go beyond that, because of course, what we're realizing now is that who's defined the classics for all these years? There's a lot more movies out there that should be classics, but have gotten overlooked, which is part of what I write about and teach about. So study the classics, but also then make your own canon. Look for the voices that you don't see represented enough. Kind of go beyond what other people are talking about and get to know as many different kinds of films as you possibly can, would be the first thing. And I mean, from the past, from the present, you really want to be able to contextualize. That is part of a critic's job, is to be able to contextualize any film that you see. So the stronger background you have, the better off you'll be.
Sure.
And then I would say, write a great pitch. Think about what, after you've watched all these movies, what really interests you, and then write a pitch. Write about, I don't know, if you're interested in Wong Kar-wai, go back and look at his movies and think about, okay, how are they relevant today? And he's got another movie coming out, so what could I write about that I could then pitch to any film site would be interested in that, really, and really work on it until you feel like it is perfect. And I will say also, I follow the rule of 10. Okay, so, and I did this especially when I was starting out. My feeling, especially when I was starting, was I would get one acceptance for every 10 pitches that I sent out. Wow. And of course, you could send the same pitch 10 times, but if a lot of people are rejecting it, there's probably a reason. So you could send 10 different pitches or the same pitch 10 times, but send something out 10 times. And if you do, you will almost certainly get, some kind of acceptance or some kind of response that will help you get to the next level.
Wow. Yeah, the rule of 10. I love that. Yes. And should students try to compile a portfolio now by submitting reviews to their school newspapers?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. So you definitely need writing samples if you're going to, there's so many different levels, right, or rungs. So if you're going to want to go kind of to the next level or the next level after that, you're going to have to start on the first level, which is compiling those writing samples. That's exactly right, Sasha. So if you can do it at your school newspaper, that's amazing. If you have your own blog, that would be a great way to do it. If you want to kind of reach out to any film sites that you really like and offer to do it that way, that would be amazing too. Okay. And then once you have some, keep moving up to the next level and the next level and the next level.
Those are really great ideas. And kind of changing gears slightly, let's talk about Renegade Women in Film and TV, because I just adore this book and would love to know your inspiration for writing it.
Okay, so what I started to hear when I was sort of in my last few years at the Daily News, I started to hear this story being told that women had had such a hard time gaining a foothold in Hollywood, and that is true. And I'm so glad that we have lately been talking about that, but that's really only half the story. And the other half that I was not hearing at all was just as important, that there was a time when women wrote, directed, or produced half the movies made in Hollywood. But because they were written out of history, new generations have been unable to find inspiration in their remarkable influence and work. So I really wanted to write those women back in and say, yes, it's been hard, but also I guess what I want to say is the story that we sort of have been told over many, many, many years is maybe women aren't that great at filmmaking, and that's why they're struggling. And I wanted to say, actually, look at all these amazing women who innovated film and television, right, and we just don't talk about them. So that was the goal for me.
Yeah. And why did you include film and TV?
Yes. So it actually started as a book entirely about film. Of course, as we've been talking about, I am a film critic. It didn't even occur to me to write about TV at all. But I began to notice as I was doing my research that women in film historically have done the exact same thing that women everywhere have always done, which is to say, create new paths out of imposed limitations, looking for that window when the door is closed to them. Ida Lupino and Lucille Ball, but all the way up now, we've flipped it to Ava DuVernay, who got her power, right, from film and now is using it to help other women in television as well. So women really revolutionized television too, in a way that has not been explored or acknowledged nearly enough.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. And you interviewed so many fascinating icons for this book. Did you have a favorite?
Well, the honest truth, and this is really, really true, is that I loved all of them. I think we sort of have these images of our icons, right? So I was surprised when Rita Moreno and Sigourney Weaver, for example, turned out to be so funny and down to earth. And I was also surprised on the flip side, for example, when Amy Poehler turned out to be very, very serious. But the conversation that I've thought most about, I think, is probably my interview with Barbara Streisand, because she talked so much about how crucial language is and how important it is for us to really think about the words that we hear and use on a daily basis that we really don't notice. So when I was talking to her about her reputation as a diva, she asked me if I could think of any men who are referred to by that word, let alone as often as she is. I mean, that has become sort of a part of who she is to all of us. She doesn't see herself that way. And when I couldn't, she pointed out that the same characteristics are often called assertive or committed in men, but aggressive or controlling in women. And I think that that's something that's relevant in all fields, right? Not just this one. So I think back to that a lot. I thought about it a lot, during the election. I think about that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and goodness, interviewing Barbara Streisand must have been the opportunity of a lifetime. Oh my gosh. And how did you get in touch with all of these icons?
Okay, so I guess that would be another great lesson that I learned, and I hope can be kind of inspirational as well. I just reached out to them. I thought, what do I have to lose? And I might as well start at the top. So, I mean, I saw Molly and I just went for it. But also, when I sort of sent out my first email, I sent it to Barbara, or I sent it to her assistant. And I thought there is no way, right? There's no way. And they wrote back almost immediately. And she said, sure, she'd love to do it.
Wow.
And I kept getting that over and over because these women also want to support the cause of telling the stories that haven't been told and pulling these voices out of the shadows. But I would never have known if I hadn't started at the top, if I hadn't just gone for it,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's so encouraging to hear. And I don't think any of us would have imagined that would have been possible, but that's really amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone would also love to hear your thoughts on what might help move the needle for underrepresented voices in film.
Yes. Okay. So there is only one thing that Hollywood loves more than money. More than upholding the status quo, and that is making money. That's it. Okay. So it is up to us to move the needle, right? We need to seek out movies by underrepresented voices. And we need, if we like them, we need to spread the word. That's actually one of my favorite parts of being a film critic, is getting the chance to do that. And that's how somebody gets a second film, right? That's how somebody gets a production deal. Because there is a status quo and there are gatekeepers. And so we all together need to be the ones to kind of push those gates down. For example, Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, I mean, they are so data driven, right? So if all of us are looking at female filmmakers or, films by people of color or things, or people of underrepresented voices in any way, they're going to notice that, right? And they're going to put more money into that, and more people will have opportunities, and that's good for all of us.
Yeah, those are really hugely important thoughts. So at this point, why don't we turn it over to audience questions? We received some in advance that I'll start with. And
Okay.
for all of you out there in Zoom land, please feel free to write your question in the chat box right now, which I will scroll through and find. So the first question comes from Ellison Jones of Washington, D.C., who asks, what are the trends, wonderful and horrible, in feature films these days, and why do you think they are developing?
Yeah, great question. So I actually think that what we've been talking about is a trend in itself, that we are looking more towards underrepresented voices. And I think that that is because it's become clear that people want that, right? If the audiences hadn't responded, I mean, Hollywood would have been happy to drop it. So, but because we are responding, I think that that's a trend that's going to eventually just become kind of a reality, which I love. And by the same token, we're also seeing far more film festivals that are devoted to underrepresented voices, which I think is also great. More distribution, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the more people who are successful, the more they're going to help other people as well. So that is a fantastic trend. When I pitched this book, believe it or not, it was only a few years ago, there was no Time's Up movement. There was no Me Too movement. I mean, things have changed so quickly, and that is amazing. Another trend, I think, that obviously has been exacerbated in the last year, but I think we were heading this way anyway, is streaming, right? And that's controversial. Some people feel one way, some people feel another. I happen to think it's great because I do think that the studios are the primary gatekeepers in Hollywood. I am all for tearing down any gates that we possibly can. And you see Netflix, for example, has really done a great job at pulling out more female filmmakers in particular. They have whole sections on female filmmakers, but they're also giving money to women who are making movies more than the studios did, for example. And so I do feel like the more paths we have, the better, again, it is for everyone, both artists and audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And we received another question asking if there are any great books on the subject of film criticism that you would recommend to us.
Yes, absolutely. So I would go back again to, I can show you too, I would go back to Kale and Ebert and Haskell. All of them should be read. But also, my editor asked me when we were sort of finishing up the book if I wanted to save extra space for a bibliography. And that was not even a question. I said, absolutely. And there were two reasons for that. I mean, one obviously was that I wanted to give credit to the amazing writers, whose work I used in research. But the other reason was because I really wanted a simple, quick place that anybody could go to find, the books that they should start by reading. And so if you and you can do this really with any film book that you like, but if you just look in the back of the book at the bibliography right there, start right there, because those are all books that everyone should be reading. And if you're going to start with one, I will say she's the first chapter in my book. I would say the memoirs of Alice Guy Blaché, who is the mother of cinema.
Wow. Yeah, that's really wonderful. So another question, Carol from New Haven, Connecticut asks if it's possible to get a good film critic job without an undergrad or master's degree in film.
Absolutely. I mean, I got almost all of my jobs without a degree. I was, like I said, I was an English and French major. And the reason that I did get a degree, but the answer is absolutely yes, no matter what. The reason that I did it, I was already at the Daily News. So I had a lot of experience. I was probably 30 when I got my graduate degree, and I worked full time. And so I did it pretty slowly. I did one or two classes at a time. And I just felt that I really wanted the strongest possible background, both in history and analysis, because that's really what criticism is. It's contextualizing and analyzing. But I will say, certainly any liberal arts degree is going to give you a background in analysis. Every term paper that makes you crazy the night before it's due, that right there, that's your training.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And someone in the chat box is wondering how you found the celebrity's contact information.
Great question, and a very simple answer. There is a website called whorepresents.com, and you can look up any celebrity you want to, and it will tell you who their manager or their publicist are. It happens that because I've been a film critic for so long, and as I mentioned, half the job is writing about film rather than reviewing films. So I did know a lot of the publicists that, came up for the women that I wanted to talk to, or they knew my work. So I think that did help, but it's not necessary. There is no reason. I actually did know somebody connected to Barbra Streisand when I found out who her contact info was, but I didn't know all of them. Right. And you don't have to. You can absolutely write them blind if you have a great idea.
Yeah. And I think everyone is grabbing pens to scribble down that website name right now. Oh my gosh, I had no idea that existed. That's incredible. We have another question from someone who asks, what's the most challenging part of your job?
Oh, that is a good question. I would say when people start in film criticism, I think they find that it is very easy to either pan a movie or rave about a movie. And you see that a lot of times with young critics. I certainly experienced that early on, and my editors, I had great editors, and they helped me with that. It's so much easier to kind of have a strong opinion one way or another than to really take the film and all of its elements as a whole and come up with a more measured and balanced approach. And that's something that I really did work on in the early years, and I think has served me very well.
Right. That's really interesting. And another student wonders if there's anything you wish you had done differently in your career, or is there any piece of advice that was especially helpful to you?
Wow. Okay. It took me a long time, I will say, to become comfortable with edits. When I started, I would send something in. I worked really hard on it. I always, did several drafts before I turned it in. And so I turned it in thinking it was the best it could be. And then I'd get back edits and I would be like, what? No, this is how I wanted to say it. And, this is what it should have been. And it was hard for me to adapt to somebody else kind of bringing in their thoughts into my voice. And that took me a while. And I do wish that I'd been more open-minded early on in that, I think, because that was a struggle. That was one of the bigger struggles for me. Yeah. The truth is, my editors helped me so much in becoming a better writer. And now most of the things that I turn in really don't get back at very many edits at all.
Yeah.
Thanks to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a question from Shelby Heitner, who is a Brown alum, class of 18, who is referring back to your earlier answer and would like to know, how do you demonstrate consistency and reliability to editors?
Yes. Okay. So that is so important. And I feel like you are already halfway there just by recognizing that and asking that question. Because there are a lot of great writers out there, but there aren't a lot of people who are both great writers and always turn everything in on time and always spell check twice and, always edit themselves 3 times and, always follow up and always sort of answer all of their editors' questions. So if you can do all of those things, you're gonna have to push yourself probably. That was hard for me in the beginning. But if you can do all of those things, you will immediately jump ahead of so much of the competition. You really will. And editors are always looking for that. They're not just looking for great writers. They're looking for great writers who can be consistent and reliable. So that's really the best thing that you can do for yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I can't resist asking you, what did you think of Christopher Nolan's controversial decision to only release Tenon to theaters in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah. I mean, of course it was in his contract. I understood the studio wanted to make, had to make him happy. And also it was in his contract, no doubt. And I understand why he wanted to do it, but it wasn't the choice that I would have made, I guess is all I can say. You know what I mean? I don't know. There are very few films, I guess Nolan's films are among them, but there are very few films that truly, I think, have to be seen in a theater or cannot be appreciated. I also think it's really important in any field, and I'm not saying Nolan doesn't do this, but I am saying it is important in any field to be able to pivot. And if ever there were a year where we all needed to pivot, this is that year. So.
Yeah, 100%. Another student is asking, what has been your favorite film?
So I think my favorite, this changes constantly, but one film that I love so much and always have is Robert Altman's Nashville, which is still, it was made in the 70s, but it is still so relevant today. And I mean, like literally today, this year, it's so relevant. It was written by Joan Tewksbury, and there are some amazing roles for women, really complex roles for women, which you did not see in the 1970s. A lot of you have probably read Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. That's like very, that's sort of how we think of the 70s. And women were kind of pushed to the side. And Altman did not do that with Nashville. And I love that. And I love the fact that he made a movie that still speaks to us so strongly today.
Right, yeah. One student is asking, is it necessary to live in New York City or LA these days to be a successful film print critic, or in the digital era, can you be anywhere?
To be a successful print critic? Well, no, absolutely not. I will say right off. To work at one of the major newspapers, yes, probably. I mean, for one thing, screenings are most likely to be for the major newspapers. Screenings will be in the major cities, not just LA and New York. They'll be in every major city. If you're in Boston, they screen there. If you're in Atlanta, they screen there. But for magazines, for major websites, absolutely not. So the answer is no way. Only, I would say, for the newspapers, and that's it.
Got it.
But you can be anywhere in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And do you have any tips for applying to jobs? What routes would you take? What would that process look like?
So I would start, as you mentioned, by making sure that you've gotten writing samples from school or from websites that you really like, or your own writing, that's online, or however you want to do that. So you definitely want to start with a lot of samples. You don't need a lot, but you definitely want to start with several samples, and you want to do it often enough that you've gotten very comfortable with it. So you're kind of presenting, the best work that you can. And then again, it's just moving up each rung, one after another. So you start with one and you probably are not going to get paid. Maybe the second one you won't get paid either, but by the third one, now you've got so many great samples. And then, it's like Barbra Streisand, right? Like, reach for the top, go wherever you want. Don't start by maybe pitching the New Yorker, because if you get a rejection, I've actually seen people do that and then get very discouraged, and that's a shame. But if you start by building your way up, you will never get discouraged, because you're going to keep getting yeses all along the way, and you're going to keep meeting editors who want to keep working with you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Elizabeth, this has been really wonderful. And while I hate to say it, I think we are just about out of time, but here's one last question to wind up our chat. If there's one thing you could tell students who are about to go out into the world to look for a job in the midst of a deadly pandemic and a bitterly divided country, what words of wisdom would you give us?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm sorry that any of you do have to go out into that world. It's not fair, and I know it's hard, but I would encourage you not to get discouraged, because there is always a way. In fact, there are so many ways, and I will give you an example right now. Now you've all met me, right? And so if you have any questions at all, you are welcome to connect with me. My website is elizabethweitzman.com. You can reach me that way. So right away, now you know somebody you can reach out to. People are going to tell you need connections. You need to know people. If you don't know an agent, you can't sell a proposal. If you don't know an editor, you'll never sell a pitch. That is not true. Do not listen to the gatekeepers. There's always a connection. There's always a way. You can take Sue's class. You'll meet several editors that way. You know me now, right? There's so many, you can reach out. Almost everybody is actually accessible these days. So if you have a favorite writer, or if you have a favorite publication or website, you can find an editor very easily. There's always a way now to reach out to people. And I would say also, success really is sort of 50% passion and 50% persistence. And again, the people who succeed it's not the people who are the best. It's the people who work the hardest and keep going in the face of those gates. It's like I write about Ida Lupino, for example, who was a great independent filmmaker in the early years of Hollywood. She couldn't get anywhere after a while. She made amazing movies, and then she faced so many obstacles. So she looked around and she saw this brand new medium of television. And then she blazed this amazing trail that way. So just keep looking around, because there's always a way.
Yeah, that's so encouraging and such great advice. So we'll let that be the last word. So in closing, I'd like to thank our lovely audience for joining us this afternoon, but most of all, thank you, Elizabeth, for being here today. Your presence has meant so much to all of us here at Brown and Ivy Film Festival, and we are so grateful.
Oh, thank you so much, Sasha. And thank you to all of you. Good luck. And honestly, any of you are welcome to reach out at any time.
That is wonderful. And needless to say, we will all be looking forward to reading your next film review, or even better, your next fabulous book.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, Elizabeth, and goodbye for now.
Bye.
See you soon.